Hello, everyone. I hope that you are having a nice day. Today, we are talking about objectivism and subjectivism in morality. Our central questions for today are what is a meta-ethical approach? Is there a universal standard of behavior? Is a universal principle of behavior possible? And should religion be seen as a moral compass? Please keep in mind the difference between questions 2 and 3. There's a difference between the actual existence of a universal standard of behavior and the possibility of maybe establishing one if we don't have any. I want to start with this case study for us to locate ourselves in the discussion. So in this dilemma, we see that a family lives in a country where assisted suicide is illegal, but the mother is terminally ill, enduring immense suffering, and in no condition to make a decision. They are considering traveling to a neighboring country where euthanasia is legal to help her and her pain. If you're unfamiliar with the concept, euthanasia is the medical procedure to terminate the life of a person that is terminally ill. However, one of the daughters, who is deeply religious, strongly opposes the idea, citing her moral convictions. Her stance clashes with two of her siblings, who argue that it is immoral to let their mother continue to suffer, and another one dismissing the religious objection, pointing out that their mother is actually not religious herself. So we see that there are different perspectives here, that there are different opinions, and there are different standards that are being used to make this decision. So the questions here is, what factors should the family consider when deciding whether to pursue assisted suicide for their mother? Are some factors more important than others? Should morality align with the place where they are located? Or when family members disagree on a moral issue, whose values or beliefs should carry on the most weight? So there are different perspectives here that we are considering to try to fully understand the standards or the context in which we are taking this decision. We could discuss on the action of euthanasia in itself, but rather we are asking a broader question here. And it is, who's to say? Who are the ones that we are considering here? Who is to say that one action is more or less defendable, if one standard is more or less defendable, if the perspective of one of these people is more or less defendable? Who's to say that what is the right thing to do here? So the task here, and to request the answer, the request to answer why or who's to say, goes beyond normative ethics. We are not discussing here the morality of euthanasia in itself. Rather, we are trying to determine what are the standards that we are going to follow. Are we going to follow the standards of the land where we are residing? Are we going to abide by the principles of the religious daughter, of the daughter that is not religious, of the mother herself? And why are we following these standards? Is that something universal? Would it be the same for a family that is not religious at all? Would it be different for a different person in a different place? Or is it something that should be universally considerable? For this task, we need to define moral terms. We need to find a way to justify our moral standards, statements, and to defend the reach of our moral standards. How far, if I have some personal standards, to what extent it should be applicable to somebody else. So the bottom line, we are asking the question, what is the truth value of a moral statement? Can we defend statements of the type X is right or X is wrong? If I say that something is right or that something, whatever it is wrong, do I have any kind of standard? Do I have any kind of principle that I can use to support this kind of a statement? If I say 1 + 1 is 2, I have a standard, I have a universal standard that I can use to say my statement is actually true. If I say that Fayetteville is in North Carolina, I have a universal standard that I can use to support that statement. Now, if I say euthanasia is morally right or euthanasia is morally wrong, what kind of standard do I have to support that kind of statement? Is it the same as the mathematical one? Is it the same as the geographical one? Is it a factual statement? Is it an opinionated statement? Is it something that depends? The actual support of that statement is something that we will have to defend before we can actually judge the action in itself. This is the task of metaethics. Metaethics consists in the attempt to answer the fundamental philosophical questions about the nature of ethical theory, issues of semantics, validity of moral statements, the nature of moral concepts, and the nature of moral knowledge. For us to guide ourselves in this discussion, we are going to follow these diagrams. This is going to be very handy in the following weeks. So in this diagram, we see that the question presented by metaethics is, are moral statements true? Can we say that whenever we say anything is right or anything is wrong, can that statement be true? So we are going to see some theories that defend that, yes, we can say that moral statements are true. One theory is going to say, yes, it is universally true regardless of any kind of context. That is something that we call moral objectivism or moral absolutism. We are going to see more in detail some of these theories later. Also, another theory is going to say, yes, moral statements can be true, but it depends on the culture or depends on the self. One theory called cultural relativism is going to say moral statements can be true depending on the standard that is set by the culture where the action is located. So if the action is located in a place where the moral values align with the action, then it is going to be correct. If it is located in a place where it collides, it is opposed to the values of the place, then it is going to be wrong. Another theory called subjective relativism is going to say that a moral statement can be true depending on the self. In this case, the standard is the individual. If I support that action, then the action is right. If I don't support the action, then the action is wrong. So if I say that, I don't know, stealing is not a bad action, then I can steal, because basically I am the standard that I am using to justify my moral statements. Maybe some of you are not familiar with the concept of relativism. When we talk about relativism, we defend that something is relative. Mainly, we are saying that it depends. That idea of relative is that it is connected in its value to something else. When I say that something is absolute, I say that it doesn't depend. Does it depend on what place of the earth I am to say that 1 + 1 is 2? No, it doesn't depend. It does not depend on my opinion or the culture or if I like it or not. It doesn't matter. 1 + 1 is going to be 2. When I say that something is relative, I am defending that this is something that is framed under something that makes it dependable. It depends on the person or it depends on the culture. So if I say that, I don't know, cheating on your significant other or having a second wife, is that right or wrong? And then you might say, well, it depends. There are some places of the world in which having a second wife is perfectly fine. Then the standard would be the culture where the action is located. Now, there are some theories that are going to defend that moral statements are not likely to be true or false, that it is something entirely different. The first one is called emotivism. This theory defends that moral standards are not scientifically verifiable. We have to understand, because it tends to be confusing, to say that emotivism defends that things are right or wrong depending on our emotions. That is not, I want to highlight this, that is not what this theory defends. The theory that defends that it depends on our emotions would be subjective relativism. Emotivism would say that it is just something that when we talk about morality, we are just talking about emotions, and that is not good enough for us to say that something is right or wrong, that it is that strongly defended. So if I say that stealing is bad, then I am just showing my preference. if which is not stronger than just saying that I prefer strawberry ice cream or vanilla ice cream or any other kind of ice cream. It is to the same level of strength. So emotivism says, no, you cannot say that those things that you call moral standards are actually that strong for people to judge other actions. It is not something that is scientifically verifiable. It is just like poetry. I'm not going to judge you because of how you are preferring a specific color or a specific location in the world. Emotivism rules out the possibility that we can have a judging standard of morality. And also we have the theory of nihilism. Nihilism defends that there are no true moral standards or values, and this is part of a broader notion of standards that are not just moral, but any kind of standards. Nihilism would say that there are no standards whatsoever. There are no standards for truth. There are no standards for morality. There are no standards for aesthetics, for something that I can call true, pretty, or correct. So actually, I cannot judge the actions of anybody because there's not such thing as true or false or as good or bad. This is kind of the general structure of the analysis that we are going to make about the truth value of moral statements. So moral standards are the study of the general nature of morals and of the specific moral choices that are made by a person. Standards are different from actions. Standards are what we use to compare in the judging of actions, not actions themselves. And the big question is how broad these standards can be. Standards can only be personal, can only be cultural, can only be universal. How should we deal with moral disagreements? The first theory that we are going to analyze is moral objectivism. Moral objectivism is a meta-ethical position that some system of ethics or universal ethics applies universally. That is for all similarly situated individuals, regardless of culture, race, sex, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, or any other distinguishing feature. Moral universalism is opposed to moral nihilism and moral relativism. This theory defends that morality is something that is universally valid. It is not something that depends on other things. And when we say the word objectivism, we are suggesting the idea that morality is connected to a fact. It is factually correct. So it is regardless of the culture, regardless of the opinion, it is just absolutely objective. So moral statements are true or false universally, and there is such a thing as a moral fact, which is the standard that we use to say that something is right or wrong. When it comes to moral disagreements, what happens, because it is undeniable that there are moral disagreements. We do have moral disagreements. So what do we do when these things arise? In the case of moral objectivism, would hold that since there's such thing as a moral fact, then any position that accords with facts is correct or right, and the one that opposes with facts is wrong. So when there are moral disagreements, moral objectivism would say there is such a thing as being wrong. We have this spirit of tolerance that says that, well, if this is something that you defend, then you are correct, maybe different from what I defend, but I am not going to judge you as right or wrong. This is not what moral objectivism would defend. It would say, if there is a fact, that is the standard, and those that are according to the standard and the fact are correct, the other ones are just plainly wrong, and it is like fair game for us to judge their actions. We also have the theory of moral relativism. It is the view that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint. For example, the one from a culture or a historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. There is no absolute standard of morality since actions are judged depending on a particular situation or a particular context. Some moral relativists base their ideas from a broader sense of relativism that questions absolute truths. So there are some connections with ideas of knowledge, and those are like important for this, but we are not going to dive so deeply in these ideas. The main point of moral relativism is that the standard that we use to judge morality is something that depends on a specific context. And there's no context that is more important than others. So if there's a place in the world where people are like used to hurt each other in specific circumstances, and we have this moral value of not hurting people, no one is right, no one is wrong. It is right for them in their context. It is right for us in our context. There is there's no clash here. And one of these theories in moral relativism is subjective relativism, the view that an action is morally right if a person approves of it. A person's approval makes the action right. This doctrine, as well as cultural relativism, is in stark contrast to a moral objectivism, the view that some moral principles are valid for everyone. In this case, the standard that we are going to use to judge an action is the individual. If the individual says that something's right, it is right. If the individual says that it is wrong, then it is just wrong. According to subjective relativism, everybody acts according to their own moral standards. Everybody's moral standards are correct. Therefore, we are kind of like morally infallible because the standard that we are using to judge our actions is exactly the same one that is motivating our actions. If I steal from other people, the willingness that I have to steal is exactly the same judgment that is telling me that it is morally correct to do it. So anything that we do ends up being just right. In the case of moral relativism, it would hold that there is not such thing as a moral fact. Then the truth value of a moral statement depends on a situation or a perspective. If I say that any action is right and another person says that that action is wrong, there is a possibility that we are both correct, since both of us are judging things from different standards and we are just applying them at our own criteria or our own judgment. The idea of moral nihilism defends that ethical claims are generally false. It holds that there are no objective moral facts or true propositions. Nothing is morally good, bad, right, wrong, anything, because there are no moral truths. We cannot state that there is something morally true. A moral nihilist would say that the statement murder is wrong cannot be either correct or incorrect, basically because we don't have a standard to support that kind of statement. In the idea of moral disagreements, according to moral nihilism, it would hold that there's not such thing as a moral fact or any position that can be supported as correct. So there's actually nothing that can be said as right or wrong. If I defend an action and somebody opposes that action, according to nihilism, actually both of us are wrong because there's no standard for us to support the value of our statements. If we, and of course, it would be easier for us to find examples of relativism, since like we can talk about different cultures of different people. In the case of cultural relativism, different cultures. In the case of subjective relativism, the case that we have moral disagreements, and this spirit of tolerance is telling us there has to be some way in which all of us are right and we don't end up judging people. But if we want to talk about an example of an absolute moral standard, we can use the example of religion. Religion defends that morality is something factual, and that fact, as we saw last class, is the will of God. The will of God is factual, and anything that we do to support an action, if it is according to the will of God, then it has to be correct. If it is opposed to the will of God, it has to be wrong. It doesn't matter if your opinion is different. It is factually wrong due to the standard, which is universal. And outside of religion, we saw some arguments in the video from Sam Harris trying to defend a possible case for moral objectivism. So the question here is, what are some arguments from Sam Harris that would support the possibility of objective, therefore universal moral standards? So I would like you to think about two of those. So even if moral facts are not evident, we clearly have some moral criteria that leads us to think that some things are better and some things are worse. And he presented this in the example of of food. He was saying, well, I know that if I am going to have some pizza, if my options are pizza or salad, I know that something is healthier than the other. I know that the salad is going to be healthier than the pizza. But if I'm comparing pizza with poison, I know that pizza is going to be healthier than the poison. This is trying to defend the idea that even if we don't have a universally correct idea, we do have some common sense ideas of things that are better and some common sense ideas of things that are wrong. Therefore, if it is not very specific, we still have that notion of gradation that people agree with and that are commonsensical, which suggests the possibility of more objective moral principles. It is important to highlight that objectivism might not say that all moral standards have a universal value. If we can think of at least one idea that is morally universal, then we would be defending the idea of objectivism. One of the problems of relativism is the idea that we all have to be tolerant. It is kind of like an implied concept in relativism. So if people are different from a different opinion or a different culture, I still have to respect their opinion. Now, that idea of tolerance, regardless of the culture, seems to be a universal idea. Universally, regardless of my culture, I should be tolerant of other people. That might end up being an absolute and universal principle more aligned with moral objectivism. So, a possible defense for objectivism showed that these agreements are not proof that universal principles don't exist. And Sam Harris highlights that there is such thing as just people that are wrong. And he finds different elements in different cultures. He talks about like the treatment of women, of how some cultures might be overexposing or over-controlling how a woman looks. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no universal principles. He presents the example of the Taliban and ideas about physics. If the Taliban disagree with principles of physics, I am not just going to say that physics are relative. I am saying that some cultures are actually more knowledgeable of some moral ideas, and exactly the same thing happens with individuals. If personally I just disagree with, like, I don't know, gravity. I don't like gravity. I just think that it is wrong. You're not going to say, oh, all right, so in order to be tolerant with him, so I have to relativize the idea of gravity. You're not going to do it. You're just going to say, I am just plainly wrong. So this idea of these agreements is not a proof that universal principles don't exist or that relative principles are the standard for morality. There's an idea that even if we do not have a clearly defined universal principle, we still have notions of ideas that are better or worse and people that are more or less knowledgeable of moral issues. So we still have the idea of moral experts. If you have a dilemma, if you have this action that you're not sure if you should or shouldn't do it, there are people that you are going to go to for an advice, and you know that you would not go to any person. There's very special kinds of people that you are going to try to find. So that shows some idea that we all have a notion of moral expertise, even if we want to defend that everybody is correct. The fact that some realities are not the peak representation of morality does not mean that it is not universalizable. We know, and this is connected with the example of the treatment of women, the fact that we don't have a peak notion of morality doesn't mean that that is not a possible thing that we can achieve, understand, discover, or agree. But of course, this module has the intention to understand this principle, not to defend that one or the other is better. So we also have to recognize some possible defense for relativism. It recognizes the difference in judgment of actions. So it recognizes the possibilities of autonomous decisions by different people. It recognizes different situations and circumstances in which actions can be right and wrong. So it provides some flexibility that respond to the complexity of human behavior and human circumstances. And it fosters tolerance since moral ideas are not imposed on others. Also, it kind of responds to the answer of who's to say. When we are in the discussion about objective moral principles, one of the big questions is going to be, all right, who's to say? Who is the person that has the moral possibility to say that action is universally wrong for whatever culture or whatever individual around the world? So in this case, relativism is going to present a compelling answer for that question. And if we are asked who's to say, it is going to say more or less like, yeah, more than one person has the moral value to respond that action about what is right and what is wrong. What we learned today, we talked about the justification of moral standards is a metaethical issue. The difference between we learned the difference between objective and subjective standards, and we saw how religion could be an example of a universal moral standard. This is our session on in which we are explaining some more concepts, and we are introducing some of the concepts of chapter 2. So please keep an eye on your syllabus. Tuesday we have the reading and the inquisitive corresponding to chapter 2. So please keep an eye on that, read that, complete the inquisitive, and let me know if you have any questions. Please don't forget to answer the questions that are associated with this video lecture, and don't hesitate to contact me if there's anything I can do to help. Have a nice weekend.